Hi, I'm R.L. Parker, epic fantasy and dark fantasy author. I'm going to show you how I use Affinity Publisher to format my paperback and hardcover novels. First, I wanted to give you a little word on why I chose Affinity Publisher, why I'm using that versus other formatting software. And hopefully by the time I'm finished, you'll see a little bit more of the power behind this software and what you can do with it, and that definitely has a lot to do with it. At the end of the day, though, I came from Adobe InDesign. That is more the industry standard software. A lot of publishing houses use that, a lot of magazines use that, and other companies. And it's very powerful. It does a lot, but it comes with the Adobe price tag. So I started looking as an indie author for anything I could use that would have close to that power, but be cheaper. And what I found was Affinity Publisher, which is actually, in my opinion, superior and much cheaper. Affinity Publisher is a one-time payment. When I bought my copy, it was version 1, and it was like $49.99, and now I think the price is $69.99, which still is far cheaper than Adobe's monthly recurring cost. I paid for Adobe InDesign for 2 years. I used it to format 2 books. Did I get my money's worth out of it? No. I paid way more for that software than I did anything else, and I thought some of the other software I bought was a pretty big price tag. So at a certain point, I just had to reevaluate my budget and the monthly expenses I was paying as an author, which if you have published before, you know can pile up pretty fast. And one of the areas I needed to cut costs was definitely in software licenses. And thank you, Affinity, for developing what you have. But let's show you why I'm not just happy with the price, but very happy with the product. And I sometimes go out of my way to tell people this is what they should be using. At the end of the day, you use what you're comfortable with and what you can afford, and that's perfectly fine. But in the case that you are like me, let's move on. So I've opened my example book that I'm going to use, which is my novel named Sissy, in Microsoft Word first, because I want to show you our starting point. I write in Scrivener. I export to Word doc. I then sometimes take that Word doc and put it up on Google Docs for my editor to retrieve, or I convert it to a GDoc for some alpha readers and maybe some beta reader interaction. That's all fairly common. But it does mean that my writing transfers between those systems through Microsoft Word. I do have a license for Microsoft Word, so I can tweak things in here. I know that not every author does. Some authors write in Microsoft Word. But at the end of the day, you can go into Affinity from anything. RTFs, PDFs, doc files, anything that isn't basically a Google Doc. You need a physical file that you can transfer into Affinity Publisher. If your file carries formatting and styles with it, such as Microsoft Word, those styles will get imported into your Affinity project. So while in some ways it does make it a little bit more tedious depending on your desired outcome, I wanted to show you how that plays out, because it is one of the more, it's a little more complex than just bringing in a text file and doing it raw in Affinity. So without further ado, let's proceed to that next phase. So this is Affinity Publisher. It starts off with a very blank screen, not a lot going on here. And if you are new to the system, this can be a little bit daunting because it doesn't really guide you so much. But that's what you have me for. The center here that is very dark gray, I believe I have it in dark mode. This is what you would call your spread. So when we finally open a document and it's represented on screen, you'll see left side page, right side page, or even numbered page, odd numbered page, laid out like a book would be. And then that lets you then add content and do your styling. To get started though, we're going to do a little bit of legwork first. We're going to create a new project which will allow us to define our paper size and our margins. No matter what, you're going to start with some type of margin setting, and you want it to be as close to your target as possible. Having perfect margin alignment from the start is almost impossible, because you're not going to know the true size, the page count of your book, and therefore the binding size until you've done at least one format. So I'm going to give you some starting margins that you can begin your work with, and you can then enhance and tweak from there to hone things in so that it makes it through the Amazon publishing algorithm or Ingham Sparks safety and editing checks. Wherever you're publishing through, they'll have an approval process that will, in some cases, be very strict on your margins. So I'll give you a starting point. You import and you edit your document, you get that final word count, and then there are some calculators that you can download from Amazon, or you can just attempt an upload and let it tell you, hey, your margins are too wide, and you can adjust. And we'll go over that process in a little more detail. But before we even get to importing our content, we're also going to set up a few, we're going to import content and set up styles before we start styling anything dramatically. And you'll see why later. All of this has a rhyme and a reason. Just bear with me. So first we're going to click File and New. In here you can pick whatever starting format you want out of this grid. There are some press-ready photos, web devices. There's a whole bunch of templates because, again, it does a lot more than just published novels or format novels. Once you establish one, let's say you go through the whole process and build out a 5.25 or a 5.5 by 8 or whatever, you can save it as a template. Like I've created a template here for pamphlets and brochures that I print to hand out at events. But in this case, I'm just going to use the A4, which is fairly standard format, just as a baseline, because I'm immediately going to the right side of this pop-up menu and I'm going to change things. So I work in inches, and most of the publishing industry for the size of your book does work in inches. So I'm going to go with a paperback size. I prefer 5.25 by 8. Now the reason is I don't like hardcovers and paperbacks being the same size. I also like to get closer to the 1980s, 1990s era trad pub paperback sizes, and the paperbacks when they're on 5.25 by 8 aren't as floppy. So there's a lot of reasons to go that route. You pick whatever size you want. This is the example I'm going to give you. So we do 5.25 by 8 and leave it at 300 dpi. The higher resolution, the better. And then make sure it's in portrait. That's where it will default or should default. I start off with a single page, and we're going to let our content add the pages for us. Then I am going to go down, make sure default master is checked. I always keep facing pages horizontal and start on right. That tells it you're a book. You don't want it to start on the left. Your format will not work for you. And then it's time to set our margins. Now I always start with a 0.64 inner margin, 0.35 outer margin, a 0.25 top, and a 0.25 bottom. Now it's fairly typical for your average novel to be within this range, a little bit above, a little bit below. Again, once you have your manuscript formatted and you start uploading it somewhere or checking in a margin calculator, once you have your actual page count, this becomes a little bit easier to hone in. Inner, for those that are curious, is right at the binding. So it's where your page meets the binding in the middle of the book. Outer is the outside of the page that is open air beyond. All right, and we're going to ignore bleed because this is not a magazine, it's not a coloring book, doesn't have full page art. It's text. All right, so then we click create. And after it processes, you end up with 3 things: 2 master pages side by side and 1 page to hold content. Now this is not ready yet for you to drop your content into place. What we need to do is edit your master. So your master is effectively, it's a template for every page that gets added. Any page that gets added that is attached to that master will inherit the styles and the containers that you have added to your master. So we are going to want headers and footers and a place to drop our content. Now you might think this blue box is there to hold content. It's not. That is your margin. and it can actually be turned off if you turn off show margins under the view menu. So that won't hold content yet. To do that, we need to add text boxes to our screen. I'm going to add a header. I'm going to copy that header, paste it down bottom. I need the arrow tool. It switched to the text tool when I did that, so let me do this again. Now I have a duplicate, and this is just a text box, so duplicating it doesn't affect anything. I am going to, on this page, draw another text box that is going to be just inside the boundaries of that header-footer combo. Because if I try and draw it on the left, it will snap and try and attach to those others. So now I have this. I'm going to drag this in here. And, oh, look at that. I guessed pretty right. So now I have one page that is set up with a header and a footer and a center to hold the body content of the book. I'm going to hold Shift and select all three. Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and I move it over here. And for those of you that aren't on Windows, that's Command C, Command V. You should know how that works. All right, so now I have two pages with my containers set up. There's one more container setup that you want to do, and that's click this little triangle on the left side, and that tells it that my content will flow to this container. Now I need to set up my headers and my footers so that those styles can be inherited from or by the rest of the pages. So I am going to my header here, make sure it's left aligned. I want my header to be bottom aligned, so your vertical alignment. And I'm going to change I'm going to click into it with the text box. I'm going to change the font family to what I prefer, which this will import every font that you have on your system. Make sure they are licensed or fair use fonts. So I'm going to go with Cinzel 9-point font for my headers. This is text that shows up on screen on the page that isn't your story. So it's not supposed to be as prominent. It's there in case the reader wants to look back at it. And I'm also going to change the font color to a lighter gray just by using the opacity. So now I click in here and I will type Sissy, and that's too light, so I'm going to change the gray or change the opacity, and that's a little bit better. And I also want the left facing header to have the name of the section that you're in. So I'm going to name sections as I go along. Those named sections will be my chapters. So ultimately you would see Sissy Foreboding for the first chapter. To do that, we do text and insert fields section name. And that injects a section name placeholder that will get replaced by the name of any section in the book. And then I'm going to go to the right. In fact, I'm going to copy this Sissy over here, and I'm going to paste it over here. We're going to tell that to be bottom aligned, right aligned, so it jams over here in the corner. I change this to R.L. Parker, my name. In the footer, I'm going to change or insert the page number. So text, insert fields, page number, and then Control A, copy that, or Control A to highlight that, and I'm going to change the font for that to crimson text. That's what I prefer to use. Now all of these fonts get embedded, the characters you use from your font families get embedded into the PDF. So they carry right along with your published work, and Amazon or Ingram Spark or Lulu or any of those other companies will use the same exact fonts you've outlined here. I'm going to change this to 9-point, and we're going to also dim this one out a wee bit so that it is not as obvious to your face when you're looking at the page number on a page. copy that, paste it over here, and in this case, we write a line. So now I have my author name top right, my book and chapter name top left. I have a page number on the bottom right and the bottom left. Good? All right, one more thing to do before we leave this screen, and that is to take these two text boxes. I'm going to shift click both of them, and we are going to change the alignment on both of these. So what we want is justify all. So that is just a good baseline default. Now we are almost ready to import our content. So I'm going to go to the master page here, and or the page here out of the master. And what we want to do next is just save ourselves some stress later. So we're going to take all of these styles that we aren't going to need, and we're going to clear them. So we're not going to use any of these styles. And I can't multi-select. So we're going to one by one delete. No, not edit, delete. And delete body. So now we have two no styles. We're just going to ignore those. One's a paragraph no style and one is a character no style. So we have all of that done. How do we get from here to where we need to be? We are going to click File and Place and Sissy and Open. So a lot just happened, all behind the scenes. You see this red down here on the right? That means if this is showing up, it means you have content that goes beyond the boundaries of your box. This little eye lets you see that content. We don't need that turned on. But what we will want to do from here is we are going to hold Shift and we're going to click on this arrow. That's going to almost make my system crash as it really thinks hard. And as you can see, I now have quite a lot of content spilling into my screen. So this is just the Microsoft Word formatting. It's not going to get us very far, but it did import the heading style and not much else, and normal. So we're going to use heading and normal to then base everything off of. What I'm going to do is start with, oh no, seriously, give me the ability to edit. All right, so I'm going to check this and make sure that it's not. So I left my opacity setting wrong, so we're going to go back into our master. Okay, so I got that fixed and I learned a valuable lesson. So let's show you that lesson. What I've learned is that if you use opacity on your header and footer and then import a document via File and Place, it grabs the opacity of your header and footer for some reason. This is probably just a simple bug, and I am still in V1. It very well may be fixed in V2. But either way, it was me trying something new and fancy that I hadn't actually experimented with, and we've both learned our lesson. All right, so let's get to the nitty-gritty. We need to do a few things here. We need to establish our styles that we're going to use in our published work versus the heading and normal that came in from Word. We're going to do that by editing heading 1 and normal, and we're going to base other styles off of those two. The reason we do that is so that if you ever need to adjust the size of your font, you can edit just one style and it should trickle through most of them. This is very key. That way, when you have any adjustments that need to be made because it failed through the publishing verification, or you just want to rescale and resize your book, it really only needs to happen in one place and everything else inherits from it. So to get down to business, one thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create two character styles, one for initial capitals and one for drop caps. This will be much more relevant later, but let's get it out of the way now so that I don't forget. So if there's a +A on the bottom right of the screen over here, which is create character style. So I'm going to click that. We're going to make sure that everything says, first of all, we're going to name it. We'll do the initial cap, and we will make sure it's based on the on no style, and no next style declared, no next level declared. We don't need a keyboard shortcut. This is a character type. We're going to make sure the font is listed as no change, and that all of this says no change. We're not going to check the italic box or any of that. We're going to the color and decorations, and we're going to make sure all of that is turned off. Position and transform should be all no change. No change in language. Nothing in the optical alignment. Nothing selected under alternates. Nothing selected under variants, and nothing selected under figures. The only thing we want it to apply to any text we apply the style to is all caps. And that's it. So we're going to click OK, and that will create our all caps character style. You can tell the difference between the different type of styles by the symbol here on the far left. These have a little A with an underscore, and if it's a paragraph style, it has the carriage return symbol. From there, we're going to right-click on initial cap and duplicate initial cap to create one called drop cap. Now, in this case, we do want it to inherit from initial cap, and we're going to make sure that capitals is checked so that the drop cap character is always capital. And then we're going to select a font family. So in this case, we're not going to do anything with size. We're not going to do anything with weight, width, none of that. We're only going to set the font family. In my case, I like to use the Dump Plots font for my drop cap. And you'll see an example of that when we finally apply this. But we don't need to specify any other settings. And you can see down bottom, it says Style Settings, Initial Cap, plus Font Dump Plots, all caps. And now we have our two critical character styles. Now we're going to edit normal. So with normal, we want to change this to the word content because I like it better. You can leave it normal if you want. I am also going to change this from Times New Roman or Arial or whatever Calibri it defaulted to. This is going to be what I publish under, which is Laura. You can get a lot of these fonts that I'm going to be using today off of fonts.google.com. The ones that aren't were open licensed from sites like DA Fonts. I highly recommend the Google fonts though. So we're going to start this at 10.5 point font in Laura. We also want to make sure that we have our hyphenation set. We do not like forced hyphenation of words that cross lines. We want it to add a few more spaces and shift the word around so that it stays whole. If you don't do this, or if you don't really like hyper focus on dialing these settings in, you will have paragraphs that end up with like dashes all down the right side. It is not fun to read. It's not fun to see a book that's formatted that way. Nobody will like it. So I just turn them off. And then flow, we want to make sure we disengage the keep with previous paragraph, disengage the keep paragraph together. We do want prevent orphan lines and prevent widowed last lines. And we don't really want the whole keep with next and all of that. Justification, we are going to make a slight change here, potentially. No, that's under spacing. Here it is. So alignment, we want justified with last line on left. So what that'll do is you'll get the nice even crisp edges on the left and the right, but the final line of that paragraph will be left aligned so it stays on the left and doesn't kind of weirdly stretch out to try and fill the whole thing. We also want a leading edge, just a little bit. This is where you're going to set your line spacing. So I tend to do either exact or whatever, but in this case we're going to run a very simple example and do percent height. So this will be a percentage of your font height or your line height. In this case, I want to do 135%, and that will get us a nice readable space. Just note that is not what I currently use in my currently published novels, but I will be exploring changing my formatting in the near future and doing a republish. First line indent is very important for your paragraph recognition for the human eye. I use 0.24. That is 0.24 of an inch. Space before, space after. We're not really going to play with those. If you want to, you can have extra spacing between your paragraphs. That's where your space after comes in. Don't use space before. It'll throw you off. Use space after, and you can say use space before always, or you can say space between same styles can be, whatever number of points you want it to be. I'm not going to set those values. We're going to live with it as it is for now. We can always adjust later. We don't worry about tab stops. We already looked at justification. We already looked at flow and hyphenation. We don't need to set drop caps or any of that yet. I will go to drop caps and make sure it is totally disabled, and initial words and make sure it is totally disabled. So that this style content will not itself grant initial word styling or drop cap styling. In fact, it will disengage it from whatever it might be inheriting from, which is nothing. And then we will click OK. So now content is established. Well, we also want to do first chapter, second, or chapter start, and we want to do scene start and those types of content. So we want to right click on content and say create style based on content. So when we create style based on content, you will see right away it says based on content. And we want to make sure the next style says content. That way, if anything happens and your styles go a little bit askew, you can change one paragraph to content and the rest will become content. Or if you change one to chapter text or chapter start, which is what we're getting ready to create, then the others will inherit from it. And actually, we'll do scene start first. So scene start. The only difference from content that we want to impose here is we want to go down to initial words and enable this. So you'll have to check it twice. We want to set our max word count to 3. And then style should be initial cap. And that will apply that style, initial cap, to the first 3 letters or first 3 words of your paragraph. Pretty simple. We click OK on that, which means, by the way, if you've been doing all this by hand in Word, you no longer need to. You can use Affinity Publisher. I know I did that for a while. And we're going to right click on scene start, create style based on scene start. We are going to boost the max word count to 5 and then make sure it's checked. We can leave style alone. If you want to specify it here, you can, but it should inherit it from scene start. And then we're also going to go to drop caps and enable this. So I like to turn off auto here to force this, and I'm going to say 3 lines. So the drop cap will be 3 sentences tall, basically. And we want to do 1 character. And distance to text we will dial later, but usually it's good at 0.3 or 0.13. We'll start at 0.3 and dial from there. We do want it to align to left edge by force, and we want it to scale for descenders. So if there aren't enough lines, it'll reduce in size a bit. And we want to use the drop cap style. And that should be the only changes for this. The only other thing is we want to make sure both of these, and I need to go double check the other. We go to spacing, and first line indent should be 0 by force. And this will be chapter start. And we'll go back to the other and actually, whoa, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Delete you, delete you. We'll do that in the scene start since we inherited. All right, so we'll click OK here and go back to scene start, right click, edit scene start. And for first line indent, we force that to be 0. Okay, so now we've got the 3 main body styles complete. You may eventually want to do another one, and I'll actually show you. So if you have smaller flashbacks or a letter that somebody's reading or something like that, generally speaking, you would want one of 2 styles to handle those, and that would push them in from the outer edges and all of that. So what we will do is create a style based on content, and we will call this one, say, quote. So somebody's quoting somebody, or it's a flashback, or whatever it is, it's going to be pushed in from the sides and not necessarily forced to be italics. So in this case, we want that. We want the left indent to be, say, 0.45. We want the right indent to be 0.45. We want the first line indent to be 45 plus 24, 69, 0.69. And then last line outdent can be whatever he wants to be. And then that is, so we'll call this a block quote, actually. Block quote. And that will push that content closer into the center of the screen with no other changes. And we will make sure that the style says inherit from content, and next style we will leave alone. Okay. So now we have block quote, and from block quote we will create another style based on him. We will go to our font, and we will make sure that these guys are always italics, and we will set this one to flashback, for lack of a better name. Okay, so that lets you do an inline flashback or an inline block quote, like a character is holding up in your book a scroll or something and reading it out loud. You can put the scroll's text right there in that block quote format, and it's a visual guide to the readers that, hey, this is an aside from the story that relates to the scene that's happening. All right, bear with me here. Now the next one we want to edit is heading 1. So that is currently being occupied by foreboding. I'm going to do something a little different here. You may follow pieces and parts of this as you see fit, but bear with me a sec. All right, and so I am going to edit heading 1 like we did for normal. And let's go. So edit heading 1. I'm going to start with one that is called chapter title, because I want a numbered and named chapter break. So my chapter title is going to use Cinzel Decorative. I'm happy with that, and I'm happy with the 24-point font. That's what came in from Microsoft Word. I'm not going to change anything else about it. In the font section, I do want to make sure I go to spacing and make sure all of this is not really doing anything. I do want it centered. I don't want any leading. I actually want to force first line indent to be 0. I'm going to force, let's see what it says it's inheriting from. So my heading says it's inheriting from content. I'm going to turn that off to no style and no style. And actually my next style should be one that isn't created yet. I'll come back to this. I'll explain that in a sec. Okay, so in other words, my font should be Cinzel Decorative 24. If I come back to see, capitals should be no change. Spacing should be, let's change this back and see if it fixed the inheritance. And it did. So it's not inheriting from anybody right now. That means I can leave these all as no change. And we can drag this to the side and kind of see what's going on. Okay, so we've got our chapter title started and created. Now we're going to base another style off of it. So inherit or create style based on chapter title. I click that, and I'm going to call this chapter number. And then I am going to go to the font section, and we're going to change this to 12 PT. And then make sure it's not changing anything. It's not. We want to make sure it's centered and all of that. So just to reinforce the center, And leading is nothing, left indent, all of that. But space before, this is where we're going to pull some magic. 220 PT. That's a lot of PT, Rick. Yes, it is. And see, space before, always. And we are done on this screen. And then we go to flow, start on next odd page. So odd numbers are on your right side and even numbers are on your left side. So we're going to say start on odd page. We don't care about any of this other stuff. And none of that change. So chapter number is now set and should be good to go. We'll click OK. So here's what happens. I want to get rid of all this white space that Word added. And actually Scrivener added it and Word just reinforced it. And then I'm going to type chapter 1. I'm going to highlight that line. And that looks like it's got some indents going on. So, oh, that's because it's content. So I'm going to change this to chapter number. Oh no, where'd it go? Right there. So there's some content above this that was stopping it from being on this page. So I just go to that little one empty line, click and delete. And here I am, chapter 1, foreboding. Now we can even get a little fancier with this and play with the line spacing. You can push them into negative numbers and you can squeeze these two closer together. At this point, I don't really care about that too much. The next thing we need to style for is this, because I use subtitles. You may or may not, that's up to you. For my subtitles, I do like them being based off of content, but we're going to definitely make some tweaks. So I'm going to, first of all, name this subtitle. And actually, I normally name this timestamp because that is a timestamp for my fictional world. So it lets the reader know when this chapter begins, this is the time, or the date. Then I'm going to go into the font, and I'm going to change this to Merriweather. Whoop, too far. Boy, you're scrolling fast today. Merriweather. I'm going to force it to be italic, and I want it to be 9-point font because I don't want it to be too overly cumbersome on the screen. All right, and we're going to go into the spacing. Make sure he is set to center, and we are going to do first line indent as 0. Enter, and make sure that we have spacing before set to 0, spacing after set to 0 by force, and there we go. Okay, and now I can do a little bit of formatting, and you can see. So we got this guy. We want to set him to subtitle. We got this first chapter, or well, actually, no, I don't want to do that yet. I want to do one more thing. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. There's scene breaks also need their own style. These 3 stars are exported by Scrivener. A lot of authors add them by hand. It's pretty typical to have this, but right now it's scrunched up. It's all squeezed down into one single line. It's hard. It's easy to miss with the eye. Doesn't look crisp. Doesn't look professional. So we're going to clean that up too. First of all, I'm going to do something that you will probably think is just absolutely crazy, and I'm going to replace these 3 stars with L, L, L. No spaces, just 3 L's. Why, Rick? Well, because I'm going to base this style off of the subtitle. Now, yeah, I'll base it off subtitle. Because subtitle's already centered and all that stuff. So, name this one Scene Break. I will go to the font. Now, font family, you're going to laugh, but I'm going to use Wingdings, actually. So I'm going to use Wingdings. It's not a font most people use, especially publishing a book. But this means I don't have to add art for my scene breaks. You'll see why in a second. I also want to make sure that they are 10-pitch font, no matter what. And we want to verify the spacing. We're just going to force it to center, and we want to change the space before and the space after. So space before we are going to do as 12 pt, and the space after 12 pt. That will create a nice buffer around that, and we want to make sure first line indent is forced to 0, so that it is indeed centered instead of centered plus a little space. All right, and we will change that, and we can assign, he's highlighted, so we will assign scene break to him, and there you go. Now if I don't like that font, let's say I go back to scene break, and I can change the font itself to Webdings instead, and I get my little throwing stars or whatever you want to call them. So that's typically what I end up doing is that, or the 3 dots. I've bounced between the two opinion-wise. But now that we've got the styles set to where we want, I also want to show you a little trick that's going to make our whole world a little easier. And we're going to quickly go through and edit these real fast from top down. And what I mean by top down is the order they should appear in your manuscript. So we'll start with chapter number. So why are we editing these, Rick? Why? We just got out of these screens. Go to Style, click on Keyboard Shortcut, and pick a keyboard shortcut. I use Control-Shift plus a number. So the first one, Control-Shift-1. Let's go to Title. Edit chapter title, Control-Shift-2. Let's go to the next one is the subtitle. Edit subtitle. Because you're getting ready to do your entire manuscript. Control-Shift-3. Okay. Let's go to the next one, which would be chapter start. Chapter start, edit chapter start, Control-Shift-4. And then we want content. Edit content, Control-Shift-5. Okay, and you can see all the numbers are appearing over here on the right side of the screen. Now I'm going to do scene break. Control-Shift-6. And scene start. Control-Shift-7. Okay, I've got my style set. Now I need to do something you probably will cringe at, and that is Control-A. So I've got all of my content highlighted, and I'm going to change it all to content. So this lets me ensure that everything has that base style. It did not automatically have that base style on the body text. This lets me force that. And then from here, I can start either tweaking that style, which some people will end up doing invariably, or I can just start applying the styles to the content as I scroll to it. I'm just hitting those hotkeys, Control-Shift-1, Control-Shift-2, Control-Shift-3, Control-Shift-4. Now we know we need to adjust that distance to text. So let's edit chapter start one more time, and we'll go to the drop cap, and this distance to text is what we're going to dial. We're going to move this down until it looks right. Oh, look at that. So 0.04 was the value we needed. All right, and then I can just start scrolling through my document. I will move this to the left so that I can see it all, and there is that guy. He is our scene break. Scene break. Applied. Well, this is the first chapter in a scene, so scene start, Control-Shift-7, and we keep scrolling. Scene break, Control-Shift-6. But I've got to change the characters to LLL. Control-Shift-7. LLL. Whoop, back up, hit enter. Go back up here, Control-Shift-7. Oh no, Control-Shift-6, sorry. Next paragraph is Control-Shift-7 because that's the start of a chapter, or a scene. And because it's quoted, it's a little weird. And we can tweak that later by hand if we ever choose to. This is an example, so we won't. LLL, Control Shift 6, down to the next line, Control Shift 7. And you can see how this changes the impact of your scene breaks. It makes it a very visually distinct experience. I see this triple star that tells me I'm changing perspectives or locations or time or something. And then the triple cap, 3 words capitalized to start off that scene, just kind of drives that point home and makes it feel like a more in-depth experience reading your book. And now we go to the next one. What I want to do is get you to the next chapter. LL and Control Shift 6. Next, Control Shift 7. And keep scrolling. And you'll just proceed to do this through your whole book until you've got all of these little things taken care of. And we see a weirdness happening here. So this guy thinks he needs to be on a new page. We just try and delete whatever characters are causing that to happen. Hit enter. And we know that we have these empty spaces added by our previous process. And now we got, Detritus, that's a chapter name. Control Shift 2. And right above that, we want a new line because we need to type chapter 2. And Control Shift 1 that. And boom, he moves over to the next page. And this guy is Control Shift 3. Control Shift 4. Oh, look. Why did that happen? Well, it happened because there's a hidden character there you can't see. So I back that character up, and boom, boom, boom. Chapter 2 is now in progress. Okay. From here, what I would recommend is actually continuing through the book and doing that over and over and over, because as you tweak these styles, it is going to change the size of the text. It's going to push content around. You may decide, I want content to be just slightly different, so I'm going to edit content, and I'm going to, maybe increase the font size, or maybe I'll go to the spacing and I'll increase this percentage here and maybe bump that to 145%, right? Which dramatically changes everything. So all of these things are in your control. You can do those if you wish. I also want you to notice that when I did that, it increased the font size or the font spacing on my entire document, which made chapter 1 larger by half a page, or actually by a full page. So when it did that, chapter 1 now ends on an odd number page, 21, but chapter 2's beginning style said, well, I've got to start on a new page and have a 220 point padding. So it introduced an empty page between the two because that's what should happen, and it did it on its own. So these are why we do the types of settings that we do, is to make our manuscript behave and adjust and adapt to minor little changes that we make, so that we don't have to go through the entire document over and over and over making changes. Now, this next step is something that I would recommend you do near the end, because it can result in a lot of rework if you have to go and adjust things. So here's what I do. And I'll show you how to reverse this too, in case you make changes and have to do that rework later. But notice I've selected over here on the left side of the screen over my head. These are the list of your pages. So I'm going to select Detritus. And if you double click on one of these, it jumps to that page just to confirm that you've got the right one. But you can see the blue square around it. I'm going to right click and say Start New Section. And then I'm going to give this section the name of the chapter, Detritus. Or I could even say Chapter 2, Detritus. Chapter 2. Space dash space, Detritus. And then I'll click on Section 1 and name this Chapter 1. Foreboding. Now I click Close. Look what happened to the top left page. Sissy, Chapter 1, Foreboding. I scroll down here and re-enter. Whoa. Oh, I must have checked. Oh, there's Detritus. So that's Chapter 2, Detritus, right there. And everything's going to say detritus after this until the end because I haven't gone through and named all of the sections. But that's kind of the general premise, is you would do this to exhaustion to the end of your book. Now, the one thing I did not show, because that is up to you how you do it, and there are a few industry standards, is this is not where my book would normally start. Normally, I would have a title page, a copyright page, a dedication, possibly a prologue. There might be other front matter like pronunciation guides or maps or reading list or an acknowledgement for your artist or anything else that you want to add would all go in here before you ever even dragged this content in. You can do it first, but you certainly should do it first if you know it, but you don't have to. You can always come in and right click and add a page before and start adding your content, your front matter. I'm sorry. But what I wanted to show you about the headings and footers. So when you are dealing with a page or chapter start, you don't want to have any headings and footers on a chapter start. What you want to have is nothing. So the best way to get rid of those is to back that out and to back that out just by clicking in and hitting delete. And that's it. And if you ever need to bring that back, you can always click on the page, right click, and apply master. And just let it go master A because it's the only one we specified. And boom, it's back. It's that easy. So reversing that deletion, far easier here than it is in Adobe InDesign. Okay, so we have now formatted, let's pretend we're done. We've formatted our entire book as a 5.25 by 8. And we've gone through and done a bang up job making sure everything looks exactly how we want. We've got the word count per page that we want. We don't have some funky line spacing that makes it just look like it's out of shape. We're happy. We want to get this ready to print. All right, well, that's as easy as file, export. You're not unsolved. Oh, wow. Oh, it's because the content's off screen. All right, so since there's content off screen, it'll throw that error. All you got to do is hit shift and click, and it'll add the pages. As you increase your font, as you add spacing, as you do those types of things, it is going to shift your content around. And that will sometimes push your content out of bounds. What did it do? What did it do? Let's undo that. Control Z. Okay, let's go down here to the last page. I don't know what it was thinking there. So we've got this guy. Let's shift and click. We'll do it on the last page and hopefully it won't go too wonky. All right, that was better. So note to you, note to me, don't do that on the first page anymore once you have more pages. All right, so it should go to the export page just fine now. Here we are. You export as a PDF, and we want to export usually to X1A 2003. That defaults to 300 DPI, which we like, that's higher resolution, because officially a PDF is images. Now, it's embedded text, and some programs can edit that embedded text. But as far as most publishing services, they treat them like images, and they just scale your image to the page size you tell them, and boom. Now, the one thing that will trip you up usually on this page at least once is do not just export from here. See this area where it says all spreads? Change that to all pages. Defaults to all spreads for some reason, catches me at least one time per book that I format. From there, you can export and give it a file name, and you're golden. You have your PDF for the 5.25 by 8. You can save it, and that's what I recommend doing if you're doing what I'm going to suggest next. So you save it as, say, sissy 5.25 by x dot afpub is what it's going to be. So you've got your afpub project. Now, once you've done all of that, you're ready to move on to formatting your 6 by 9. This is where Affinity Publisher becomes really awesome. So go to your master page. You don't want to do this from your normal pages. You want to do this from your master. And then once you're sitting here, you're going to click File and Spread Setup. In Spread Setup, uncheck this lock so that you can change these two dimensions freely without them binding to each other. Change the first number to a 6 and the second number to a 9. Now you're just about ready, because from here you're going to go into the scaling menu and tell it to rescale. And then click OK. And watch what happens. Target pages differ in size to the master. Would you like to resize them to match? Yes. All of your pages changed. And if you click into your fonts, notice up here that my content is now 11.8 PT. It just scaled my 5.25 by 8 automatically to 6 by 9. It made all of the text fit into the same positions on the same pages by scaling it all up. That's why I do it the way that I do, because I don't have to go in and tweak anything. If I've done my first formatting pass correctly and everything is pristine, the only AFPub file or project file I ever have to save is my 5.25 by 8, and I can automatically scale to my 6 by 9. This changed my world for formatting. When I was doing this in Adobe InDesign and going between paperback and hardcover, I had to do this whole process by hand and adjust everything by hand. And Affinity Publisher just says, we'll calculate that for you. So this is how you can do multiple books easily formatted in one night. For example, for my largest novel, it is Bathe in the Blood of Ravens, and I used a really small font on this in order to keep the print cost down, to keep my page cost down. I believe this one is, I think, 10.5 for the hardcover with no line spacing, and it's 650 pages. So 650 page, 225,000 word book, and I formatted the whole book in Affinity Publisher when I redid it in 3 hours. And that was paperback and hardcover in 3 hours. That's the magic of using a good program like this. This makes it so that everything can be adjusted and scaled on a whim. So thank you for sitting with me through that entire video that was about an hour long, maybe a little longer by the time I'm done editing. And hopefully it helps you with your formatting enterprise. I do, by the way, offer formatting services if you don't want to pay for the software yourself, or you don't want to, if you don't have a machine that you can install it on, or you don't feel like you could accomplish the learning curve and you just don't want to be bothered for whatever reason. If you wish to hire me for formatting, I'm fairly cheap. You can reach out and we can work out a deal from there. It will not be that expensive. If you are someone who eventually, if you write a book in my fictional world, Erelon, and I decide, yep, I agree, this is canon to my world, I love your story, it fits with the narrative, it's not going to break my timeline, and it doesn't step on any of my characters, I am open to those submissions as well, and those books will also get edited by my wife and formatted by me to fit the style and the theme of the world, and we'll work with you on edits and work with you on finding a cover artist, yada, yada, yada. But all to say that I do formatting for two reasons for other people. Either you paid me or you're publishing in my world. Secondary to that, if you need help with your Affinity Publisher and I'm not too busy, and you are friended me on socials and are in my Discord, then I will try and make time to hop on a video call with you on Discord where we share desktop and I watch you work in Affinity Publisher and give you help. I can do that for a limited number of people, but if it gets too much, I'll have to start charging for those services. Ultimately, if you have questions, please ask them in the comments. Feel free to send me messages on socials, asking anything else that you have. If you don't want to comment here, if you feel nervous or like you might be ridiculed or whatever, there are no dumb questions except the ones you don't ask. So, if you liked any of this or you like my type of content, please like and subscribe. Please share this with other authors who you feel may benefit from it. And congratulations on your author journey, and I hope it's going great for you, and I wish you nothing but the best.